Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name's Kason.
And today we have some special guests with us, Kim Herbst and Tim Wendorf, who are both great artists. And we brought them on for their expertise in the process of creating pixel art, because today's topic is going to be on what makes pixel art so special and endearing even after decades since we've moved past that. We're into these, HD graphics and thousands of polygons, but yet a lot of indie developers are still using really great pixel art. So before we get started, I'll pass it on to you first, Kim, and then we can move over to Tim. Guys, introduce yourselves and let people know what work that you've done. I'm going to put some of your work on screen as you are talking. And let me go ahead and just switch over. But go ahead whenever you're ready.
Hi. Thanks for having me. My name, as you said, is Kim Herbst. I'm a senior artist at Congregate. I haven't done nearly as much pixel art as Tim has, but I've been working on a game at Congregate, helping out really, called Cosmos Quest, which is a mobile version of an already existing web game. And yeah, I think I also helped out on Trexels 2 is another pixel game. And yeah.
Yeah, I've got some of your artwork up here right now. This is really, really cool.
Thank you.
I'm a huge fan. This is great. Let me show, there's a couple more here.
Hopefully I don't get in trouble, but we did tough one, so it should be okay.
It looks awesome.
Cool. Yeah, she's an amazing animator, right?
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
All right. And then you, Tim, we'll put some of your...
All right. So, yeah, I've been doing freelance pixel art pretty much since 2003. When I first started, I wasn't very good, but I made like 20 Flash games. We got bought out by Zynga, did some art director stuff there for a while, and then quit to make my own game, Shadows of Adam, which released. Started a company around that, and now I'm just like freelancing again. All the art you're seeing up there is just Twitter and Instagram pixel dailies. So I've just been trying to like press my pixel art muscle and build a new following under my new brand, Pixel Groover, which is my company name too. So
here's
it's kind of where I'm at.
The work from Shadows of Adam, which some of our viewers have played, for sure.
Yeah. Well, we live streamed it a while back when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
So for that game, I mostly art directed it.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Like maybe 20% of the art is mine, and otherwise I just hired good artists.
Yeah.
So I have the link up now for Koromon. Is that what it's called? The Pokemon clone game you're talking about? This is something you're working on now as well, right? Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm like the UI artist and character sprite artist and icon artist for that game. And I redid their logo recently, but they haven't updated it quite yet. I think they made a post about it though. So nice.
Well, yeah. So both of these artists are great. I mean, I'm looking at some of this work, and it reminds me of why I'm so passionate about the topic we're talking about today. I have lots and lots of thoughts on it. I tend to be long-winded, so I'm going to give everyone else a chance to talk first before I jump in and start, losing my mind on stuff. But like I said, today's topic is going to be on why this, I guess, form has been so long-lasting, despite the fact that technologically speaking, we moved past it quite a long time ago. Why is it that it still is so special to us? Why do we like it so much? Why do we still use it as our main aesthetic, even decades after the industry technically moved past it? And I have a lot of thoughts on that. But before we get into that, I wanted to bring this up because this was something that a lot of people on Discord sent to me. because we've talked a lot about how we would want to have remakes of some of our favorite games from the past, say on the NES or SNES, Sega Genesis that time, how we would want those to be remade in the modern age. And we've talked a lot about Octopath Traveler, and there's this YouTube channel here that kind of built the opening credits sequence, or at least a portion of it, in the style of Octopath Traveler. So you have this 3D environment with pixel art textures on the snow and the mountains surrounding, but with the pixel sprites of the Magitech armor sort of walking through the snow there.
Right.
Really, really cool sort of proof of concept.
It looks really cool.
I don't know if I would want it to necessarily completely copy. That is a remake of FF6. I don't know if I'd want it to exactly copy the style of Octopath in that way, where they have like sort of the vignette, the blurred vignette
exactly
effects and stuff
with
on
all
it.
the atmospherics and lens flares and particles.
Right.
They really went crazy with that in this and in Octopath
overkill.
Traveler.
They did go a little overkill, but
Yeah, a little overkill. But as a
it's
general
like
concept,
Bloom in indie games, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, Octo has a ton of Bloom as well.
yeah,
Yeah. They spared no God rays, bloom,
It's
just
like-
everything.
Just put every Photoshop filter on a screenshot, and they're like, "This is
Exactly.
it."
This is great, isn't it? Doesn't it look cool? Yeah, I remember when I picked up that game, I turned a lot of those off, or at least down as
Me
much as
too, and
possible, because it
they
is a
let
little
you
too
do
intense.
that, which is pretty cool.
Oh, I didn't even know.
Yeah, you can tone down the effect.
You're just playing
Yeah.
with all the bloom.
Right.
Yeah, you can tune it
Can you
down a
crank
little
that
bit so
shit
it's not
up?
so intense.
Oh, pardon me if I can't
Go
swear.
even higher with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess the
Anyways,
question being, would you maybe not? Does this need to be exactly Octopath? But would
Yeah.
you rather have this than what Square Enix would probably do if they made like a full, super realistic looking remake?
oh, totally.
I mean, that's true for me.
And we'll get into. I mean, I'll certainly get into the reasons why I would prefer them to go the pixel art route. But at least in this clip, they're showing it's like a 3D environment, kind of like Xenogears or something, or maybe a Grandia, where the environment is 3D, but it's got these really low resolution textures on them. So that at least is in keeping with the feel of pixel art, right? But the characters, the sprites themselves are 2D. And I think
2D, and
Yeah.
also their frame rate is about, I don't know, 4
Yes.
frames a second or something like that. Whereas the environment is moving by at like 60 frames a second.
that's true.
And then
that's
the
true.
pixels, they're still just doing their, which I find absolutely adorable, but
Yeah, I love
maybe
it.
other people may not like it.
I
I
dig the
personally
aesthetic.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard to do pixel art if you're going to try and have a smooth 60 because things move pixel by pixel. And so,
Right, right.
but whereas you could still take advantage of the camera movements being 60, but the character animations, I don't think that's even possible.
It's possible. It's just not very pragmatic, especially
Yeah.
from a development cost thing.
Right. It's a
And-
lot of frames.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a ton of frames.
Not only that, like responsiveness, because there've been some indie artists who are great pixel artists and animators, but
Yeah.
they make like a 32 frame run cycle or a 18 frame get up a cliff
You're making me
cycle,
think of
and they just want people
Alucard
to.
from Castlevania.
Oh, Castle.
Like-
Oh, that you know what?
Like,
Castlevania is an
when
interesting.
his run cycle, it was like the smoothest thing ever.
It is,
Um,
and he's
a good
also-
run cycle.
Gosh, how
But-
he was more than just 32 pixels tall, right? They kind
right,
of did
right.
they elongated him,
Alucard,
so he had
right?
more
Yeah.
range
Yeah.
of motion.
Yeah.
So that's like
But-
one way to do it well, because
Yeah.
they had responsiveness. But so this one dude whose game, he released a demo and people hated it because he like cared about the like you get up on the cliff animation so much that he just like didn't even worry about how it would feel. So it'd take like 2.5 seconds in this like
Oh,
smooth
God.
sort of Metroidvania type game for your character to get up a cliff, just so
Oh.
like people can see each individual frame smoothly.
Mm,
And
wow.
like the running and turning around, every single thing had that sort of like feel. So it's just not fluid. So
Oh.
Right.
I'll admit I've had to cut down on animations before because like as an artist I'm just like I'm gonna make this look as sweet as possible
Mhm.
and it's gonna be like there's like 60 frames or something, and it's like, well, we're limited to like 12. It's like,
Exactly.
like, okay.
Fine. And working within those boundaries is sometimes what makes it even all the more impressive when you can pull it off.
I think that's what makes pixel art so exciting, is those limitations, where you have to make really good decisions. And I'll have a critique on an animation or on artwork that I've made, and it's like, can we just maybe take like 1 pixel off of this side or something? It's like, we can't. Like, if we do, we lose, like, this guy loses an eye. Like, that's his eyeball, like, right there. And it's like, we can change the color, and then it's like, I was just describing this to a friend the other day. Like, making pixel art, it's like playing the first game of Mega Man, where it's just trial and error. You don't know what's gonna work.
You don't know.
And like, you just have to run through it, and it's like, well, this isn't working. Let's start from the beginning again. And like, it just lends itself really well to that, I think. I mean, there's some formulas. Like,
I could add to that just by saying, like, when I started back in 2003, I was a terrible like professional artist, and like, you show your family your artwork and they love it artist.
Okay, sure, yeah.
But I like decided to start doing freelance stuff, and I was able to like achieve the looks that these people wanted to a certain degree. And like, now I could like do the same thing, and it's like a rough sketch. It would probably take me 20 minutes, but at the time it took me maybe 4.5 hours to do something that would take me 20 minutes now. And but pixel art's forgiving enough that if you have a vision and an idea, you can accomplish it, right?
Yeah.
At least eventually. It's never gonna like stop you, and it's so small that each thing is such a big change that you can experiment.
That's true. Every pixel,
you can experiment and find the right solution eventually. Whereas like a full res like Photoshop image of like the Grand Canyon or something with humans there, either you can do it or you can't. You can do it with pixel art, but if you're doing like 4K hand-drawn version, that's like a talent you already have.
It's a different skill set,
Yeah, I think that's another thing that makes pixel art so endearing is like, it's almost it's kind of like everyone can almost do it. I'm not saying they can always do it well, but everybody can give it a shot, kind of thing. And you can definitely have a lot of indie developers that can just jump into it, and there's not as large of a learning curve compared to like if you were gonna be like, I'm gonna make a complete like 3D game in Unity or something, and it's like that's a way bigger learning curve, I think, in comparison to like, I'm gonna like, I don't have to figure out how like the proportions on this guy's leg on how to make it move for a run cycle. It's like, I just have to move these like 3 to 5 pixels and like get like the relative shape in there.
Well, that almost enables the game, like director, designer people, whoever's in charge for the most part, and especially the writers. It almost allows more time to be spent, not so much on the those types of aspects of the game, but like maybe more story writing kind of stuff, maybe some battle systems that are unique and interesting, because so much is just the imagination with pixel art. That within the game you just have more room to do other things, I guess, because you're not perfecting the climbing up the cliff cycle over and over.
Definitely.
Yeah. I know Square Enix fell into that trap as soon as the 3D stuff hit and the HD, like with Final Fantasy 13. They're just like, make these games as beautiful as can possibly ever be looked, but then it's like they missed out on so much of the story and battle system aspects that made the other games so good. But yeah, it looked beautiful, sure, but like, my gosh, like the gameplay wasn't nearly as fun as those old games.
Yeah, current Final Fantasies are just like blockbuster movies for the summer, right?
But that's what happens when you focus
just like
on the
special
look.
Effects.
Yeah,
really, really gorgeous particle effects.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things in the chat here I want to bring up. First, Lego Dog says restriction breeds creativity, which I think we all agree that is pretty much maybe the baseline reason why
I think so.
You love it so much, and it's because of two things. One, the restriction breeding the creativity. Like, how do I because art is about expression, right? I mean, that's what it is. You want to express an idea, an emotion, something in this unique way that's personal to you and that will cause the people you're sharing that with to feel the same thing or get across the idea. And the more you're restricted on that, the more you have to think of a creative way to get that idea across. And so when there are so many restrictions, say on pixel art, like you have this little tiny guy that's, I don't know, 8, 16 pixels tall or whatever. How do you express that that person is sad? How do you express that that person is excited? You know? So the ways that they came up with to do that, that's where the artistry really comes in. Yeah. But on top of that, I think that another layer to it that I really enjoyed about, and what made older games so special to me, was that they came up with a lot of abstract ways of doing it. There were lots of abstractions in games back then for how do you get across the idea that we're traveling this long distance across the world. Well, we're going to blow up your character to the size of a mountain, and it's going to take you 2 minutes to walk to the next town, but that's supposed to suggest, we're not meant to believe the character grew up to be this giant and moved across the world that way. But it's an abstraction that suggests large travel. We're not supposed to believe that the characters all just like went inside of the main guy and he started walking around as a single entity. It's an abstraction that suggests, okay, we're going to travel with you now, that we're now in a party together, we're traveling together, right? And games were really full of that back in the day, and they came up with these ways of expressing that idea that were so adorable, as Kaysen used the word, endearing. It just makes you smile. It's just like, that's such a clever idea, right? And that's one of the reasons why I love it so much. I don't know how you guys feel.
I think modern video games, that's the word, abstraction is less a thing anymore. Like there are less abstractions now. It's all just kind of there and you don't have to do anything. But humans are really good at abstraction, and that's how stories are. Essentially, they're representations, you know, they're abstractions of all the whatever protagonists, antagonists that, you know, people have encountered throughout the years, and you tell a story that's archetypal, whatever. And humans are really good at that. And then we're just slowly moving away from that by basically eliminating all abstractions that the mind, and that's, I don't know. I think that's a big key to why it's so different now.
Yeah. So something like Gradius and like power-ups, right? They used to just be like a floating letter.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't get away with that now.
Sometimes those abstractions become like a permanent fixture and like a trope of a game. Like a heart piece, for example.
Oh,
like in Zelda now, it's the literal heart pieces, right?
Zelda does a good job of maintaining a lot of those abstractions with sort of realistic gameplay.
Right. I think. Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, like, my background is initially in illustration, and we do a lot of tips and tricks of like what they would do back in old school pixel games, where it does rely heavily on like iconography in that sense. And I think those simplified shapes and you know, just images that let our imaginations run wild, it helps us, like, just as a player, like, put yourself into the role way more than if you do have like a really, really rendered world. Like, you can see the character and stuff, and in, you know, let's say like if you're playing Bloodborne or something, you know, it's, I don't know if you see yourself as that character or like this is the character, like that's, you know, that's who I'm playing. But I don't really like relate themselves to me as much as like if I'm playing as like pixel characters, where it's like they're really, really tiny and I can imagine them like sort of kind of as like what they look like in game, but like my imagination can run so much more wild from those limitations, in a sense. So that's just why I love them personally. But
yeah. Well, this is kind of an on-the-spot question. You know, hopefully you guys have some good examples, but based on kind of this line of thinking we're going on, do you have examples from your own work where you felt like incredibly restricted by whatever the director was asking of you or whatever, but that in the end your mind kind of worked around that restriction and expressed what you meant to express through the art in a way that was like, oh wow, I was able to get that across, even though I felt like I might not be able to because of the restrictions placed on me.
I could jump in because so for Quartet, Tyler's game that we talked about earlier in the beginning, he's got 8 different main characters, and I constrained all of them to 18 by 24. That's the like sprite size that they have to be. And part of that reason is because we're going to use Shadows of Adam, the tile sets for that game. And those are 16 by 16 tiles, and they were made for 16 by 16 characters. So these characters are actually kind of bigger scale than the tiles were even made for.
Oh,
except for the tiles themselves were made bigger than the characters they were made for. So it sort of balances out. But my point is that one of these characters is a giant hippo from a zoo. And so like where I filled out this space and I have these 18 by 24 humans, now I have to like fit a hippo in that exact same size. And just like the 3/4 view top down perspective, like when you turn a hippo to the side, now all of a sudden I have 18 pixels, which is like 2.5 feet. Scale to like fit a hippo to make it look chunky. As chunky as a hippo versus a human, and it worked. It somehow worked.
I was gonna say, how do you feel the result?
You guys are crazy. So I ended up having to like bump up the size from 16 by 24 to 18 by 24 to make that happen. Wow. But I was like, this is the only way it's happening, dudes. So that was a consensus and compromise.
I was gonna say you were able to kind of shift the boundaries a little bit, but not too much.
Yeah.
So, aside from like working in like RPG Maker back in the day, where I really only dabbled with it because pixel art for me has always been really hard. Like when you have that limited of a space and you want to make an outline and make it like recognizable as a creature or whatever by the outline of it, but you also want to do some shading and just like make it look really cool. I just don't understand, like, what is the process? Like, how long does that take to make a hippo look like a hippo at that size using that limited of a color palette? I mean, like,
I think the thing is like all like art and understanding of art fundamentals applies to pixel art the same as it would anything else. So like you have to understand volume and form and color and lighting and how all those things interact. But then you also have like these standardized rules of pixel art in general. Like, how do you anti-alias something? How do you make a curve look like a smooth curve? Like, how do you represent eyes or hands in certain like sizes? And it's just about abstraction of every individual part, but understanding it as a greater whole. And like definitely things like understanding perspective and form and volume play a huge part, even though you don't have to know them to do it. If you do, it just like cuts down the time and will inform your process from start to finish. And like silhouettes, right? Silhouettes are super important.
Strong silhouettes always help.
Yeah, the outline, right, being recognizable. It's kind of the same thing like what you were saying with iconography, Kim. Like when you're creating logos, like company logos, you want that logo to be recognizable from its silhouette. Like without the color, without anything else behind it, that silhouette should be strong enough to people see that and go, I know what that is immediately. And I assume making pixel art would be the same.
Definitely.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Especially, when you're like making items for a game or something, and you want the player to be able to recognize it like immediately.
Oh, yeah. It's my favorite thing to do. If I could make like 16 by 16 or 32 by 32 item icons every day, I would do that probably for the rest of my life.
Nice. I guess there's less animation needs when that kind of thing happens.
Couple of comments here from the chat real quick.
Yeah, I saw one really good
Lego Dog says Mother 3 has hippos, and it's one of the best RPGs ever made. Coincidence? I think not. Metropolis brings up Terranigma, which also has hippos in it. So, I mean, you're on the right track with that game. Whatever that game is, it's going to be good because it's got a hippo in it. So,
Dude, I was going to mention another comment. Dude McGuy said something interesting. He was talking about the day-night cycles
Yeah.
and how they still happen in common games today, like Final Fantasy 15, and they're still like 10 minutes long. Like it's not a real 24-hour day-night cycle. It's more of an abstraction.
That's
and
true.
I would also add to that games like even Call of Duty or something, when your character's running around and you're getting shot at, right?
Yeah.
And you're not dead. You kind of freak out and your vision starts to narrow and it's like, oh no, what's gonna happen? And it's like in the game you're getting shot, but in the re-abstraction you're supposed to pull from it. Oh no, you're just getting shot at. And once you get hit, then you're dead. But once you've been shot at for a long enough time, then you actually get hit. And so it's like, they kind of still do a little bit of that abstraction now, but it's just not what it used to be, I guess.
Sure. Kim, did you have an example from your work that you wanted to share where you were limited and came up with something interesting due to the limitation? Or
let me think. Again, I just haven't done nearly as much pixel work as Tim has. I mean, in a sense, the work that you were showing, like those were goodness, I'm trying to think. I don't think I really had that many limitations, unless it was animation based, where I think we had to stay under a certain amount of frames. It had to be as fast as possible. Anything that was like battle effects, it was like, it has to be as quick as possible. Nobody wants to watch like the 10-minute Final Fantasy cutscene. Like,
some people do,
like,
but yeah, I get
some people do. Like the first time you watch it, but when it's like
the summon,
gotta be able to skip it.
Standard battle like that, like that cannon firing animated GIF that I sent as a sample, it was like, it has to be like, you can't go over a certain amount or something. It was like, okay.
Sure.
And you want it, it's like, as an artist, you always like want it to look like really, really cool and like add in like all these effects and particles and stuff. And it was like, now I have to like cut it down by like half as many frames or something. I was like, so that's always like key to remember, like, oh right, this is for a game. It's not just to be viewed on the internet or something. Like it has to be functional as well. So keeping function in mind is always important.
Yeah, that was interesting. You bring up it's not just about the number of frames, but the length of the animation itself too. Because I now that I think on it, a lot of battle effects in the RPGs I played growing up, they were very snappy. And
most of them,
Kaysen and I come from a visual effects background.
Yes.
So like thinking about, say, doing an explosion or some kind of cannon fire like you were talking about, usually we would have a smoke element that would sort of like, we would want that to hang and last and dissipate naturally, like over the course of maybe a couple of seconds, maybe 5 seconds or something like that, like smoke would naturally do. But I assume that for cannon firing in as a battle effect in a pixel art game, that would need to disappear probably in less than a second, right? They would want that animation done with, and so making that smoke like dissipate.
It can't linger.
It can't linger. Can't be cool.
Yeah, I think most
it can be cool, but
I think most pixel art battle effect animations are probably less than 0.3 of a second long.
Yeah, it's super fast.
With running at like 0.08 seconds per frame. So I don't know, it's like 12 frames or something
12 frames
like
a
that.
second, something like that. So you got eight frames to.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. It's something I hadn't considered. Two comments real quick. One from Jonah the Man. When compared to realistic visuals, pixel art visuals have fewer variables that can be screwed up, which makes it easier to perfect the overall look. So that is one thing that you mentioned earlier, Kim, that you were saying, anyone can get into it. Would you say it's fair to say that it's easier to get into, but also, still just as difficult to master it, though, to really make something look beautiful in pixel art?
Definitely. Yeah. I think it's something, like I said, there's like way less of a learning curve. Like you're not going to get like really weird uncanny valley as much like in pixel art compared to like if you tried to draw it and 3D model it. There's so much less extraneous things that you have to think about and worry about. But I do think it does take a while to master. I don't even think I've remotely mastered it. seeing just some of the stuff that get posted online, and it's like, man, like why. I keep thinking, like, why didn't I think of doing this or that or the other? It's like, or even just the color palettes that people are using these days compared to what we grew up with. But I think there's a lot of really, really gorgeous stuff coming out there from a lot of people. Compared to like if you were an independent developer and you were trying to make like something as rendered as Final Fantasy 15 or something. Like it's just it would take it just takes so many more people to make a game like that compared to a pixel game.
Well, that actually goes right into another question that we had earlier. Swan Knight 14, and maybe you can kind of transition into this here. Swan Knight 14 asked, why don't they produce AAA games in pixel art these days? And it continues saying, my favorite style of art in games is pixel art, and I think it's the same for many video game players.
I think that's not a true statement. Most people are not interested in pixel art as like a blanket like genre to capture a large audience. It's still like more of a niche genre in certain types of gamers who are interested, but like your average like 40-year-old dad who's played Madden all his life isn't going to ever pick up a pixel art game, period. Whereas he might pick up Call of Duty or Uncharted, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or even like Souls, Dark Souls, whatever. All those types of games. They have more of a like movie aesthetic to them, and just like, why don't you see more pixel art movies, right? Probably because Adam Sandler ruined it for everyone.
I've never thought of that before.
But I mean,
pixel art movie.
No one cares. Like Wreck-It Ralph, that's still even like niche, but people liked it, and they found out they can like that kind of stuff. But they only do it because of it, more of a quirk than something they truly love.
It's true, because that movie still looks very visually stunning.
Right.
So that's my take on that one.
So running on that line of thought, though, because I have a couple things I want to bring up here. I'm getting a little scatterbrained, but let's take it one at a time, I guess. We're here discussing, and I mean, everyone in our chat is going to be, for the most part, people who grew up during the 90s, the Super Nintendo age in particular, I think, was really special to a lot of us. And so we all really appreciate that, the way that those artists expressed those ideas and those emotions back in the day. But certainly most people playing games today are not those of us who are now in our 30s and 40s or whatever, right? Those people most likely not. I mean, a lot of us still play a lot, but I think the vast majority of kids who played a lot of video games back then, maybe not the vast majority, but a lot of people have dropped off. They don't play games as much anymore as they used to. And most of the people playing games today are younger people, so teenagers and young people today. And Kaysen has experienced this even with his wife, who's a little bit younger than we are. She has a hard time going back and appreciating the older pixel art.
Oh my gosh. I got a Super NES Classic, and I'm just like, because my wife and I, we played Stardew Valley, and she actually, like, she was okay with that pixel art, right? And I was like, okay, you like Stardew Valley? I'm going to show you Harvest Moon, all right? I plug in Harvest Moon, and she's like, what is this? She did not want to play it at all. And it was like the day-night cycle was way too fast, and it's like there's a lot less you can do. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. Stardew Valley did more stuff, but this is the original. She didn't care. She didn't care. Stardew Valley, I think, is as pixel arty as she can really stand.
Do you guys as you're creating your games, is that something that comes up as a concern at all in terms of like, trying to reach as many people as possible, or are you just trying to kind of target more of the people who grew up in the same age that we did?
Yeah, I mean, for Shadows of Adam, we understood that we were going to have not a humongous audience. We started from the get-go targeting classic RPG players, right?
Yeah.
Like that was like Shadows of Adam was like.
But I mean, we did use some modern things like filter effects and stuff like that.
Sure.
And overlays. And I don't know, but we didn't go too crazy with it all. But
I think that's a game like with some newer ones, like maybe like Shovel Knight and stuff, where you play on the nostalgia for our age group. Like that's like it harkens back to like the old games that you might have liked. And I think maybe Stardew also does that of like, oh, like I really did love Harvest Moon, and so now I'm going to play Stardew Valley, which it's like the Skyrim version of like Harvest Moon or whatever.
So my theory is Stardew Valley.
Um,
Stardew Valley is essentially what Harvest Moon 64 would have been had they maintained their pixel art like aesthetic, as opposed to pushing into this 3D and maybe having some limitations because of that.
Right. Yeah, I just think like those particular games are they're definitely playing on our nostalgia, and maybe for people that did not play those games, the originals growing up. I mean, they can appreciate the newer ones, but
it's like they have found a middle ground there.
Yeah, if there's like, if there's less on the graphics in the older games, more so than now, and less on the gameplay, it's like it can be understandable why new players may not enjoy it as much.
Right.
As long as they recognize where it originally started from.
I know.
True, but yeah, it's about gameplay, right? Like the only reason Shovel Knight's successful is because it has good gameplay,
right,
attached to the pixel art, and it's good pixel art on top of that. Which, like, that's another thing. Calling back to something we were saying earlier about how hard it is to like really master that, is like, sure, you could make like one good standalone piece of pixel art, even, right? But how are you gonna like make an entire game look like that and feel like that one piece of art?
So I just shared with you on Discord, Tim, and I sent an email to you as well, Kim, of a little GIF from, I think it's the new version of Berserk, that remake that they did.
Oh
gosh,
put
on the screen now. And like, it's exactly what you're saying though, Tim, is that like, just because you might be able to do one aspect well and make it look good, say maybe the background there, or even like, I don't know, some aspects of the character, but that animation is just awful.
Yeah.
and even if you get just one element of it wrong, like it's going to be distracting rather than something you look at and go like, oh wow, and you appreciate it and you like get like the sense of how that character's feeling in that moment. It's just total distraction.
I really want to know what that dude is feeling walking like that.
To make him walk that way?
Because I'm dog sitting this 14-year-old dog, and she'll like slow motion walk towards the door if she has to go out, and get slower and slower the closer she gets to it, up to like it'll take her, swear to God, 12 seconds for her to lift her paw and put it down to move her next paw by the time she's super close to the door. And that's kind of what that guy walking makes me think of. He's like, why did you do this to me? I don't want to live.
Oh, man.
Okay, we had one other comment that I wanted to let you guys kind of talk about for a second if we have a chance. This comes from Squareheart. He says, can you discuss the differences between developing more realistically proportioned sprites like Street Fighter or Castlevania versus the more squat sprites in Final Fantasy 1 through 6 or Octopath? How does that affect animation? You guys have any thoughts on that?
How would it affect it? I feel pretty clearly in the fact that one has like real human anatomy and limbs, and a 3D sense of space and volume that has to be replicated. And they use a lot of rotoscoping for some of the old Capcom games.
So that's something you can't. That's something you can't do with the squat sprites, like at all. Right.
So I mean, try and rotoscope.
Do you want to explain the process of rotoscoping real quick for the?
I'm pretty sure you're just like tracing outlines of an actual filmed version of what you were trying to draw or animate.
Yeah.
So that was
somebody doing whatever, and then you trace it out, and then you have like essentially a sprite silhouette that's doing the move that you want to do, and then you can create the art.
Yeah.
If you've ever seen it, and I don't know if you can find it online, but the making of the Mortal Kombat, they got actors, I think it was only like 2 or 3 people maybe, but they got them to dress up in the costumes, and they videotaped them doing all of these moves and stuff, and got them like up on pedestals and everything to get them horizontal if they were doing like a flying kick and stuff. And then they would just take the footage and they would draw on top of it to make the sprites. It's pretty cool. Like,
that's so
pretty
smart.
amazing.
That's so smart.
I read a video game magazine during like Mortal Kombat 2 when it actually came out, and they went over some of that process.
It's interesting. I mean, because I felt like I didn't know any other games that were doing that.
No.
Like I don't know what they did for Street Fighter and stuff, but again, for games like that I think about, like if you do rotoscope, you do need to take in a little bit of like a pinch of just like creativity in there, and like
I was gonna say Uncanny Valley can,
right, like
Right.
sometimes yeah, you don't want to end up with a walk cycle that you just showed of that guy moving across the screen. Like you want to exaggerate certain things. And then that's where at least with like effects and stuff, especially when you have the larger pixel people with like the bigger proportions, or you can start doing really cool animation effects where you're smearing colors and things like that. So if somebody slashes their sword and you see that flash of light for like 1 or 2 frames, and
just briefly.
That's I mean, that's fun to add in. And you tend to, I feel like, see it more with the bigger proportion people, because there's only so much you can do when the person's arm is only like 3 pixels long. But
It grows to like 8.
Right.
That's what I'm going to do after this chat. I have to start animating some of those guys.
Just exaggerate. Yeah. And I mean, that I think it lends itself. Again, that's the experimentation. Like when people would get hit in pixel games, like their eyes would like bug out of their face and stuff, and like you had to really show the expression. It was like, how do we show like these people are happy or sad or they're hurt? That I think lends itself really great to the really squat people, because you can just be like as cartoony as possible.
Right, because they already look like totally just so like who has a head that's literally half the size of their entire body.
Like I can't imagine like Alucard from Castlevania having like his eyes bug out like in the same way. Like that's just the style of the game. But maybe make one like that if it fits the character. I think it'd be fun.
Earthworm Jim is somewhere between Alucard and like the muscle babies.
So two things I wanted to bring up in light of what you're all saying. First of all, Kaysen and I, coming from the like we said, the visual effects and animation background, we've done our fair share of rotoscoping, right? And rotoscoping in 60 frames per second, like just like going frame by frame and rotoscoping a person, for a 5-second shot at 60 frames per second is just
terrible.
It's not fun. It's not fun.
But when you consider the fact that what would you say most pixel art walk cycles are maybe 5 frames or 4 frames, or how many frames would you say go into like a
3, 5, 7.
Yeah. In that style of animation where the frames are very low, right? You go from one position to a punching position can sometimes just be one frame of a difference, right? It's like bam, which is kind of what, like you were saying, they do in like Mortal Kombat, for instance, or maybe Street Fighter, some of those fighters.
Yeah.
They're able to have those larger proportions because they kind of just snap into a pose as their next, as their punch or their kick or whatever it might be. There's very few frames of animation. So, capturing somebody moving and then just, I guess in the Street Fighter's case, you would draw over the top of that video animation that you did, or in the case of Mortal Kombat, you're literally just taking one of the frames of that person's movement from the video and just like sort of cutting out all the rest of them, right?
Yep.
So animating via rotoscoping like that is a really viable way for the larger proportions where you want to get realistic, like you're saying, anatomy and stuff like that. I know also that. Oh, sorry. What? Just one second.
I was gonna say there definitely just has to be like a little bit of the creativity like added back into that, because rotoscoping sometimes can go a little too far.
Oh, I agree for sure.
True. And a good example of a current fighting game is Skullgirls, and there's actually an artist who broke down the whole like frame by frame process, and that every like frame is hand drawn, and they have like 20 to 30 frame animations for attacks, but cut it down to 15, and it's just about keyframing what's important to sell the image.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I mean, even as far back as the original Prince of Persia, I'm doing a video on Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, and I do a little bit of history on the series leading up to it. The original game made for the Apple II, like back in 1989. Jordan Mechner used rotoscoping as his main method for animating the characters, and Prince of Persia from the beginning has always been like revered for its animation quality, and especially at that time. I don't know if there were other games that had done that before, because he came from a film background, which is kind of why he used that technique. I don't know if there were other games that did it first, but it was one of the first video games that used rotoscoping as a technique for animation. And you get that really fluid, realistic look from it. So just going back to whoever originally asked that question, rotoscoping is definitely one way that you can get some really realistic animations. But like Kim was saying, you know, got to add some creativity into that process as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have lost the chat a little bit here, but I kind of want to move on into something else real quick. And getting back to abstraction. For those of you in the audience or anyone who watches this who maybe didn't grow up with pixel art, because that was one thing we touched on, you know, how difficult is it to try and like appeal to maybe modern gamers with pixel art? Is there a hurdle to overcome there for you guys who are working on those games, right? It's really easy for me because I grew up and I guess I get it. I understand it, right? Like I know why it's so awesome and why choosing that aesthetic in and of itself is not just about capturing people's nostalgia. It is a legitimate even in and of itself an art form that is really creative in terms of its expression. So I want to kind of go into some of the reasons why I think that is. And to sort of like lead off that conversation, a lot of the same principles apply to like old cartoons, like Walt Disney and Warner Brothers with Looney Tunes and stuff from back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. You know, like you're talking about the bug eyes, you know, as like when someone's really scared or surprised or something like that, their eyes just pop like out of their head, right? That in and of itself is the kind of abstraction that we're talking about, where it's like you're going way over the top in expressing this character's emotion in that moment, and there's something funny about it. It's comedic because like it's relatable, but obviously we've never had our eyes blow out of our face when we get, you know, like frightened or something like that, right? But still,
it's that way though, right?
Yeah, but it feels like that. That's the key.
It's showing us how we actually feel.
Right. Yeah. Like the feeling is so intense that expressing it in that way is still relatable. You don't go like, ooh, gross, his eyes popped out. It's intuitive, right? Yeah. And so there's some really I watched a documentary on Netflix called Walt. It was just about the life of Walt Disney. And one thing that really stuck out to me is when they were making some of those feature films in the 40s and 50s, especially for like Snow White, Pinocchio, and stuff like that, they got really creative in some of the techniques that they used. And the first link that I sent to you guys was the multiplane camera, the Wikipedia article on it. This was one of the techniques that they used to get a 3D camera movement effect on what is essentially a 2D drawing, right? So they have all of these layers on the build here, and they would overlay pieces of the entire composition below each other like that for what's supposed to be in the foreground and then middle ground and background, and then they could move the camera and it would come together in such a way that it would look 3D. So you guys don't have this link that I'm going to be showing, but I'm showing part of that documentary. Oh, okay, there we go. So you see it kind of in action, and it's going to show this this camera move from the beginning of Pinocchio, I believe, but you can kind of see how they have like holes cut in like the foreground, right? They only have the trees, but then it's transparent. The layer is transparent otherwise.
That's cool.
Let's see.
So parallax scrolling, right?
Yeah, parallax.
Yeah.
And so the shot that's about to come up is going to show the opening shot from Pinocchio, which I hadn't seen since I was a kid. And I was like, holy crap, that's not being done in After Effects like I use. Those are legitimately layers.
Layers.
Like
Yep.
Yeah, I always wondered how they did
paper.
that kind of stuff.
And then they can focus. They can focus from one layer and then focus on the next one, so they
Yeah.
can bring things into the
they can-
foreground or back into the
yeah.
background. Yeah.
It's just like, holy crap, that is so creative. Such a creative, I guess, like solution to the problem, right? Which is we're working with 2D layers. How do we make it feel immersive in 3D, like we're moving through that town?
Mm-hmm.
And
Here, I thought they just hand drew it frame by frame.
I did too, actually.
Yeah. And while, of course, as we moved into the digital age, which is, what all video games are for the most part in terms of how the art is presented, they're not using an analog film to like film this stuff like in Pinocchio, right? But there's still, I guess, like similar creative solutions to problems that they come up with. And so I'm going to kind of just go through now one by one and show off some of my favorite pixel art and animation from the games that I like. And you can see how they are using abstraction to get across an idea. In this first one, we have Final Fantasy VI, Terra has woken up in her like Esper form, and she's just flying around the room really fast, and you can kind of get the sense, like the frenetic sense, the emotion that she's feeling of being like frightened of what's going on, where am I? And you see the reaction of Sabin there, his like the bug eye expression on his face when she jumps out of the bed, right?
Yeah.
Like you can see the level of attention to the detail in the animations that give across the idea and the emotions that the characters are feeling. And even though that's literally just 2 frames, we have Sabin's main sort of like profile frame there, and then a 1 frame change to his whoa, surprise, and then her just going around. This is all really, really simple at its base. And I think a lot of people who might not be able to appreciate pixel art, they're only seeing that aspect of it. It's so limited. But that idea is so clearly expressed, despite the limitations, that it's just like, wow, like I can feel what the characters are feeling. And to me, that's where the value of pixel art really like shines, right? If this scene were remade in modern, like HD 3D, we could actually like zoom in on the character's face and get like, they can actually do capture of the actor's actual
I'd like
facial
to see
expression.
Michael Bay direct this one.
You'd have a voice actress that you relate with the character, or the voice actors, and there'd be like really dramatic orchestral music, and lighting and stuff if this was remade today.
And
so
lots
way
of
more
editing.
cinematic.
Like there's be a lot of cuts here.
Right.
Yeah,
but is all that necessary? Probably not.
Right. It's probably not. For it's just more personal experience, I think, with pixel games. You imagine what they would sound like in your head. You imagine what their actual expressions compared to what it just looks like in pixels. But you would just imagine it so much more. And I think that's how it just really, really gets us involved in the game, is that there's so much more reliance on the imagination.
It's a good observation, right? It's a show don't tell, whereas nowadays it's like we'll tell you directly what's happening.
Every single thing,
leave no room for interpretation whatsoever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And like, sure, you can capture all the nuance of the facial expression and the breaking of the voice, and I mean all that's valuable. I mean, I by no means am advocating that we should only do it this way, but I'm saying that this is the reason this is so endearing over the years to me, is that they're able to express the same thing with 2 different sprites with Sabin there, and maybe, I don't know, it looks like there's maybe 3 or 4 actual sprites for what they're doing with Tara there, and then just animating her.
Right.
And you get the exact same idea. You feel the same things. You understand the exact same. You're expressing the same idea with such a limited set of tools.
The most I think the greatest comparison I've had is like it's like reading a book compared to seeing the movie adaptation.
Oh, sure.
Sure, yeah.
Like you enjoy the book and the words are there, the story is there, but so much of it is reliant on whoever's reading it to take it one step further. Versus the movie where it's like, like some movie adaptations are phenomenal for sure. But a lot of them have been kind of like lacking in some areas. And it's probably because we just imagined it differently in our heads or they just completely destroyed a franchise. But yeah.
How often do you hear people say, yeah, I like the movie better than the book? I like every now and then you'll hear somebody say that. Like I'm not saying it never happens. And there may be certain cases is the case. 99% of the time that I've ever heard those two things listed at the same time, it's always been the book better than the movie.
Yeah.
It's almost never the movie better than the book. And there's a reason for that. Humans are able to kind of like visualize and build the world in their heads in a way that they can't do as well with the movie because it's just right there in front of them. They just kind of have to take it for what it is.
Yeah.
But in a book, the abstraction and the how much it involves the reader in assisting the writer in crafting that world together. It's something else, and movies just don't have that as much. And pixel art kind of finds a way to kind of maintain that within a video game. It's so cool.
Yeah. Also, what about like the amount of time invested in reading a book versus watching a movie? I mean, there's just so much more put into that unless you like hated it, you're probably going to like the book more than the movie.
It's true, but why don't they make movies 10 hours long then?
Depending on like how you value your own time, at least, I guess.
That's a mini series.
Yeah, now they're doing that with Netflix series and stuff like that.
Yeah, but even still.
But no, I agree. There's more to it. That's just like one small nuance I wanted to add.
But
sure,
I think,
there's a lot more time, yeah.
I think that goes back into what we were saying where, Tim, we were saying like you could devote much more time to gameplay and the story that you're telling in the game instead of focusing on like lighting and particles and stuff and in 3D modeling. I mean, pixel art it goes a bit faster. You can do it with a smaller team, and that way the game designers can focus a little bit more on like this is the story we want to tell and this is the experience that we want to give to people. And
don't lose sight of that. Yeah,
works.
There's definitely something to be said about the amount of time and effort and management that goes into making sure the game works, that it functions with all the complicated systems, that it doesn't crash, and versus like back in the day, there's so much less to consider with that because the limits of the system, didn't allow them to implement so many different like lighting, particles, this and that, and trying to render that all at 60 frames per second and like hit a certain benchmark. There's so much time, I think, put into making the game work that in some ways takes away from the focus of making sure that the story and all those other things are being done the way that they originally envisioned. And a lot of cuts have to be made because of that, right?
But here's something to consider is that at the time that they were making Final Fantasy VI, for example, Final Fantasy VI was cutting edge pixel art at the time. And Squaresoft was always known for like trying to be above the curve for all the graphics, even during that era. So while we might not assume that they were like spending all this time and effort and energy on that kind of stuff, I feel like they probably were.
They probably were.
Like, how are we going to make this Ultima smell look way better than anything that Final Fantasy IV ever did?
Very true.
Why isn't like Final Fantasy V good enough to go to the US even? And like, why did Chrono Trigger go even further towards all these beautiful visuals and like, basically like Chrono Trigger is just a bunch of walking screenshots that everyone loves to see, right?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
That's what they like made it out to be, but they still were able to do everything else on top of it, I think.
That's true, and that's one of maybe the differences between why AAA studios don't make pixel art games as much, because pixel art today would be even more impressive than pixel art back then, of course. And it would still take a ton of time and research into making it. So, I mean, that is a good point.
Yeah, I mean, in Octopath, that's sort of our clue to see what that is. Other than that, you have like some of the, I would call them like AAA indie games, like Owlboy.
That was very well.
Iconoclast. And there are a few other type of games like that just have some of the like top pixel artists today, right? Tower 57 by Thomas.
Yeah.
All those games are a demonstration of what can be done with it now. And there's still challenges like with gameplay, and I would argue that some of those games, they don't even focus on gameplay enough and focus too much on their art. Because that's where their talents like resided, right?
Yeah.
And they just wanted to put out a game that didn't exist in terms of that sort of aesthetic.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of just fly through the rest of these.
Yeah, go through these ones. There's some cool.
We'll talk about them just for a minute, but you understand the premise of where I'm coming from. But the second image here is Sabin looking out over that huge waterfall, and just like looking at the waves and the ripples in the water as it falls, the ability to make water look like it's moving, and the foaminess of the water at the bottom versus it looking like it's falling in those sort of like ripples and waves coming down. I mean, that's a very, very tiny amount of space there. Very few pixels they're working with to get across that idea, right? Like, to me, I can really appreciate the thought and effort that went into making that look like moving water. I mean, that's really difficult to do.
Yeah.
The next image, again, is just overworld map. Terra's looking out over the ocean, and you just have kind of that effect of the moving water. It's like, it's super pixelated, but like you still get the idea. It gets the idea across, right? The next one comes from Valkyrie Profile. This is one of my favorite compositions from any 2D pixel art game I've ever seen, with the grass swaying in the wind in the foreground and all those cloud layers in the background, the beautiful castle structures back there, the rising sort of like flower petals that are also done in layers, some in the extreme foreground, some in midground, some in the background. Just so much going on there. Such a beautiful composition. Accomplished with very limited frames in terms of animation, but just something that makes you sit back and go like, wow, like that's amazing, right?
Yeah.
The next image, one of my favorites from Chrono Trigger, the campfire scene, the way that they have the lighting effect on the trees, sort of like outlining them, flickering like that, just sort of laying there by the fire. Again, very few frames of animation, but getting across a feeling of being by a campfire. The warmth of a campfire is really expressed well there. The next image is the level up animation from Terranigma. He sort of shoves his sword or spear into the ground, and you see this wind sort of blowing up from underneath him that moves his hair and his clothes, right? And it's like it's you can clearly see it. But like, again, just with these very limited tools, you can see the individual pixels there in his hair that they're moving around, but it's so cool looking. It's just like, oh, it feels powerful. It's like, bam, I just leveled up. I just got stronger, right? Like that sense is communicated so clearly in that really quick animation. And the next one would have been the last link I sent to you guys in the email. It's the YouTube video that I made about Terranigma, but this is the only place I could find this animation. But what I love about this is you get the character's personality through the way he swings his legs like that as he's climbing, because he's very mischievous and blunt. I talk about him as being like the typical 90s kid. He embodies that very, very much. And you see that in the way he moves in the game. They are expressing who the character is through his animation. And right after that, there's, some examples of the power-up.
I think that's the great attention to detail. Presenting a certain aesthetic.
The next link is Sabin and and Ga jumping around in Final Fantasy VI, you get this idea that they're excited. I actually talk about this a lot with Final Fantasy VII too, right? Because the remake's coming out, and we're talking about all of the little nuance you can get in expression.
Is it coming out though?
Someday, right? Hopefully.
We'll see. E3's coming up.
So, in any case, though, one thing that they did a lot in Final Fantasy VII is the characters would jump like this. They would just have these huge leaps. And it was expressing that the character's like, oh, surprised or excited or whatever. They didn't actually do facial animation almost at all in Final Fantasy VII, even the way that they did with some of the pixel art in like FF6.
Yeah,
but like
true.
this something like this, the cartooniness of it, like we were saying with the bug eyes, we understand it feels like that. The abstraction works in a cartoon, but when you're doing something very realistically, you can't really do that anymore. You're not going to have Cloud jump off the train. He's going to walk off the train. So you're not going to have the same, you know what I mean? You're not going to get the same abstraction is not going to work.
I think it's understanding the like psychology of the human mind and how we're going to actually interpret these things.
Yeah.
Oh,
process
sure.
them.
Yeah.
And just like having the foresight to know that, because like, I mean, I guess they're doing tests and they like tested out this scene maybe in a couple different ways. And like, how do you guys feel about it? They're like, well, I think they need to jump more or jump less, or in a circle and not in a circle. All those like small things, and like depending who's doing it, maybe they have enough intuition to have just known in the first place, this is how we have to do it.
Right.
Sure.
There was actually some user testing that was done with really, really complicated concepts. Like if the game's idea or concept was really, really complicated, they found that people liked simpler art styles to go with it, to combat the really, really complicated story that they were telling. So apparently, I mean, I think this was a decision when we made Cosmos Quest to choose the pixel art, because they don't use it for the web version, but they said we're going to do it for mobile. But it was because it was like a really it gets to like really intangible concepts. Like you just evolve your characters to the point of like they don't even have physical bodies anymore. It might even just be like light or something. And they found that people that were trying it out just handled it so much better when it was just like pixel art, just like really simple style. So that was an interesting take to hear that. So it could be that, you know, when we see these characters, you know, if we ever do see that Final Fantasy VII remake, you know, we're focusing too much on like their precise facial expression, like does it look like Uncanny Valley to us and things like that, versus like, oh, we should just be focusing on the story and we can just look at their bug-eyed expressions if they get hurt.
Yeah. Well, that's actually the next image that I have here is from Seiken Densetsu 3. You have the knight fighting against Durin at the very beginning, in the tournament at the beginning, and he strikes him and it's boom! It's just like, and that's funny, right? Like that's really endearing, but if you're going to try and represent that in a realistic way, like obviously you can't express it in the same way. It has to now become more of a more serious, dark. You see the slash and the bloody, and you know, you can't get across the same tone.
No. What do you think that accomplishes? I feel like the bug eye accomplishes it. Like one makes you feel that this dude is human and not some crazy beast, and also that he's kind of like a joke, right?
Yeah.
It also makes you feel good,
It's kind of a silliness.
And it makes you feel good. Like, yes, I did this to him.
I'm doing this to this guy.
Instead of like, oh, I'm murdering this guy.
Like I'm powerful enough to make this guy look like that, react that way.
Yeah.
Like, it's a good feeling.
Yeah. Keeps the tone a little bit lighthearted in a way that I think modern games, you can't get it in the same way. I'm not saying you can't get it at all, but you can't get it in the same way unless you're going to use more of a cartoon aesthetic. The next image is one of my favorite examples of abstraction. This is from Super Mario RPG, and it has Mario recounting to the Toads the story of what happened. And he's literally transforming into Bowser and replaying the scene, then transforming into the princess to show the other Toads what's happening. But what I love about this is not just Mario doing that. I mean, that's super clever because he doesn't have dialogue. He doesn't talk. He's a silent protagonist in the game. Actually, he's a silent protagonist all the time. I don't think he talks much outside of let's go. And so, but look at how the Toads react. They get scared and they jump back, and then they come in because they want to see it. Oh, but it's Bowser again. And the two of them are hiding kind of in those little clefts down there, right? Like, there's so much personality demonstrated in these super simple animations. And this abstract concept is immediately intuitively understood. Mario is telling the story of what happened. He's letting them know. You get that right away, and it's super clever and it's funny. And there's all this attention put into the others who are watching, and that they're very captivated by the story. And they do this a couple of times. The next one is another example of this happening, where Mario transforms into the dinosaur there. And then you have Toad jumping up and down. Yes, exactly. He's excited. That's right. That's exactly right. You know,
Mario RPG had brilliant storytelling.
Oh, it was so good.
Yeah.
It's probably my favorite game ever.
Yeah, it's way up there for me.
So the next image, I'm getting into what you were talking about a little bit, Tim, with what we can do with it now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Hyper Light Drifter is one of my favorite all-time games, and even from just an art perspective. You can see a lot of similar concepts to what we were showing before with making the water move, the lightning, all the particles in the foreground. The character has a few more frames of animation, I think, than maybe the common SNES game might have had. And of course, this is higher pixel count, if that's the right terminology for it, than what you would have been able to accomplish. They're using more colors, that sort of thing, but they're still accomplishing the same. They're still putting the same limitations on themselves and accomplishing a look that gives across the same sense of abstraction.
Yeah. So that Hyper Light Drifter, that's a game that demonstrates the ability to like capture a certain aesthetic, and like they really mastered what they were going after, right?
Yeah.
That's in the name of the game. It's in the visuals of the game, and probably in the gameplay too. I never played the game, but
it's awesome.
I just know it looks like it's perfectly executed for what they set out to execute.
Yeah.
And I think that's what separates great art in general, but pixel art as well, from just anything.
Yeah.
The next set of images here, the next link, just has a bunch of images that I thought were really, really cool of modern pixel art. Again, don't want to, beat a dead horse with the same talking points, but there's just something so cool to me about how they are able to express and compose these scenes with such limited color palettes and pixels and frames of animation, but you can see the story being told in them still.
I think it's also our respect, respecting it because of those limitations. It's like, wow, they were capable of conveying all of this with so little,
I see sort of a similarity there between like someone who actually paints on a canvas with oil versus someone doing digital art. And it's not that the digital art isn't amazing. It's just that the tools you have in digital art give you a lot more to work with. If you make a mistake, you can undo it. You can just layer things over the top of each other in ways that you can't do. You have to blend the colors. You have to actually paint over the top of the other layer that you did.
I think a lot of these examples are using gradients, which wouldn't be like true pixel art.
That's a good point.
True pixel art has to be control of every single color. So if you're using a gradient like that, and that's like Hyper Light Drifter too, which is fine. And like Shadows of Adam, we use different blend modes that also affect things. But so I mean,
it's like an updated.
Not necessarily respected the limitations of pixel art exactly, and I would say that they're just like Kim is saying. It's like just using those limitations that might appear more impressive, but the same thing could be accomplished in Photoshop, and the only difference there will be the lines
resolution.
are less blocky and there'd be like a smoother curve.
Sure. Okay, and then just two last ones. Again, I love the limits of the frames for this animation here as he's jumping around. Obviously, this is far more advanced than any animation you would have seen on the SNES. So again, you're using updated tools, kind of like you're saying,
It looks
but
more
keeping the
vector-
same
vector
feeling, which
Is that
still
pixel art?
It looks
might
a little more
not be.
vector.
I think it's
It might be
vector
more
art.
vector, but
Or-
similar, like I guess, like animation principles, right? The
Yeah.
use of
Like
abstraction.
pixel.
And then the last thing I wanted to show was a trailer for The Last Night. I don't know if you guys have seen this. This
Oh,
is one
yeah.
of the most beautiful games visually I've ever seen. And of
Yeah.
course, definitely not using the limits of pixel art the way that you're talking about,
This
Tim.
is a mix of
But
different
man,
effects
does
and
this
things,
look great.
But I think this is akin to the Octopath Final Fantasy
Yeah.
trailer, where they're just mixing those together really, really well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you're again placing certain limitations on yourself in terms of like the character's size and how can you get across what the character's feeling in this small pixelated little guy. But of course they're using lighting effects, like modern lighting effects from maybe like Unity or Unreal or something like
Yeah, I was
that.
gonna say
right?
this looks like Unreal, something like that.
I think
Yeah.
they're doing like normal mapping and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, with and like bump maps and all that the kind of tricks to
But it is great. I think it's if you're going for that like voxel look,
Mhm.
I've never
Yeah.
seen it done better than
the
this.
voxel.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is like a good compromise between where video games seem to be headed now and where video games preserving I think the tradition of the past with pixel art. And something like this is something that I absolutely am drawn to.
Oh,
I think
dude.
it's a great direction.
Yeah.
Really makes
I
me
mean,
excited.
if I were to make a video game, that is what I would want it to look like.
Yeah,
Like, right
something
there.
like that.
That's hitting it right on the head for the style I think that I would want to do in the modern age.
Right? Do you
Yeah,
still want
there's
like
still
saving
enough
how
abstraction.
jumping up and down in their game? Or like Terra smashing into walls on the street?
Sure, yeah. Anyways, so that kind of wraps up, I guess, my feelings on what makes pixel art so endearing to me. It's really boils down to the use of abstraction and the limitations of the form to get across the same ideas and the same emotions to the player or the consumer, whether you're doing like even if it was, I don't know, say like a, what do you call it, visual novel or something like that. Being able to work with creatively the limits of this form and still be able to get across all of that in a really great story. To me, there's just a deep appreciation I have for that. The artistry and the creativity and the uniqueness of the form that does it for me in a certain way that while I still, of course, love modern AAA games. I mean, God of War was awesome last year. Red Dead Redemption back in 2010 when I played that, I still, of course, enjoy that and all the nuance they can capture in those minute details are wonderful. But pixel art, to me, being able to express the same things with just a couple frames of animation, I don't know, there's something about that that's just like, it just makes me smile. I don't know. I love it. It's so cool how they were able to get across those same ideas. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
I did
Anything
have
else?
one.
Go ahead.
We had this one thing to talk about. Just wanted you guys, this may be a little more lighthearted thing. Doesn't need to be too long. But what are your opinions on the smoothing pixel art in smartphone remasters of, say, Final Fantasy VI or other games? What do you think about
Burn
that?
in hell.
Yeah, I was so excited because I heard, wasn't it like, I think Chrono Trigger or something was.
Yes, yeah, Chrono Trigger had a.
I was
report.
so excited, and then I saw it, and I thought, oh no, what did they do? Like,
So
I didn't
here
even
would
know
be
that
my
was an option.
question. My question is why? Why does that? I mean, it's the same size. It conveys similar information. The color palette's similar. Why
it
does
loses
that
it.
not work as well as pixel art?
It loses that information. It's like
Yeah.
the way that it like melts together and blurs.
Yeah,
You
muddies
lose
it a
the
bit.
sharpness and distinction of what was trying to be transpired in the first place.
It's
So
like,
Yeah,
it's
who
like
I don't know
when
who their target is with that.
exactly. It's no man's
True.
land.
It just was
Nobody.
like, it was like just get it out the door type of thing. But it's akin to like when you watch Netflix and the quality suddenly drops and like people's faces are like, it's like I don't know who I'm watching on the screen, and it's like it's the same.
Yeah, the
when you're
compression,
playing a
yeah.
game, and it's like why would you do this? Like, yeah, I want to say it was just like somebody up top was like just get it out the door kind of thing. I'm sure there was a
Lazy.
lot. I'm
Yeah,
sure
it's
there was
just
a lot that
lazy.
went into it, but it was a really weird decision to
And
do
and to
that.
challenge why it's lazy even more is they have terrible UI that they like got from mobile games, then they
Yeah.
imported it into Steam. And one, they didn't think through the UI in the first place. It looks like something you make in like what is that? I don't even know. Some like cheap UI thing. PowerPoint, right?
PowerPoint,
like-
yeah.
They asked their intern to make the UI in PowerPoint, and they're like, "Great, ship it." Didn't seem to think about the UX or the visual appearance, and then even when they got backlash on Steam for Chrono Trigger and the weird sprites, right? I think they went back and made them pixelated. They didn't fix the UI in any of it.
I know, but at least they gave the people sort of half of what they wanted.
Yeah, just don't do it. Is my point. Let us pirate them or
I remember I put up a video on the Steam version of Chrono Trigger back when they were doing all those updates to try and fix its original state because people were so pissed off about how awful it was on Steam. And one of the things they added in was the ability to turn that smoothing filter off,
right?
And just have the sharp, rough, pixelated edges. And I remember making
like
some
a middle one too, where it's
I think it's just
pixely.
Two. It's either on or off.
Okay.
But I remember making some offhanded joke like, now you don't have to play the game in this awful form. You can actually have it look good. I don't know, something just random like that. And I was actually surprised to see how many people responded and were like, either they didn't see the difference because they were watching on a cell phone, right? It's a small screen.
That's
Or two, they were like, what are you talking about? The other one looked way better with the smoothing. And I can never understand that. I will never in my life understand that. Like, are you kidding me? Like, how can you? Oh, it's just, it baffles me. I don't get it.
So maybe they did do some testing on it, and some people kind of did like it better, but it's just wrong.
I could call back to my
Those people are wrong.
argument that pixel art games are niche and people don't really care for them as much as we think.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right?
well,
back to what you're saying earlier.
If you want to capture a new audience for Chrono Trigger, you just gotta like,
especially
make it look like a
for
5-year-old drew it.
We got one from Ride here I want to bring up real quick. He says, it's interesting to think that the original Doom, among other early 90s PC games, are sprite-based as well. Has pixel art become too synonymous with just JRPGs and platformers? That's a good point. I mean, a lot of those first-person games that had releases, I think Doom also came out on the Super Nintendo, right? But yeah, originally PC games were using pixel art and sprite-based work as well. But yeah, I think
Pilot Wings Flight Simulator.
I think that those were the first genres. I don't want to say first. Maybe, anyways, you might get the idea what I'm trying to say. They were the first to try and move into, we want this to look more realistic. I think especially in the first-person view. Like if I go back and play the original Doom, to me it hurts my eyes a little bit. And I don't know if that's so much the fact that it's sprite-based as much as maybe it's just the art direction. There's too much of a monotone sort of color palette to it, and it's kind of hard to determine.
Yeah, the point of view, I think, is
swinging
is
so widely all the time. Yeah, low frame rate could be it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is true that when we think of pixel art, we're mostly thinking about side-scrolling or top-down sort of views.
Yeah. you can see so much, especially for RPGs. I mean, it's why pixels lend themselves so well to it, is because you can see so much on the screen at once, and your mind can take in all the information, like all these characters, trees, whatever. And then when you have it in like a straightforward view that you can look around in, I think that's where that point of view gets it's a little difficult, like for the mind to really register all that information, because
I think that's true.
That's your point of view, like when you look left and right in Doom.
So Minecraft is that, right?
That's true.
Yeah, that's true.
But people have mods to make it look betterish. I don't know. I mean,
Minecraft is one of those anomaly games. It'll be around forever.
That's a weird one, yeah.
And it is about like basically building stuff with pixels anyway. So
I know, it's the voxel. Like, it's so weird. Whoever had the idea for that, like the what are they called? I can't remember the company, but just insane. I can't believe it hit. And it's like the most popular game ever made ever. Like, jeez.
If you ever want to like give yourself like the pixel experience, I had this recently because my computer did not have a graphics card. I was waiting for it to come in the mail, and I decided to try Overwatch when it first came out.
Oh, geez.
And it played like an old school like 90s PC game. It was all pixelated, and I was like,
I would love to see that.
This is a very interesting experiment. I don't know if I could play the game like this, and I felt so bad because I knew how gorgeous the artwork was in that game. But if you ever want to see it like that, just take your video card, your graphics card out, and try it. It was a really crazy thing to see.
That would be fun. Wow. But since the game wasn't designed for pixel art, it wouldn't actually.
Right.
It would probably be pretty difficult.
It was really rough around the edges, but it was just like, all right, like let's try this game out.
Oh, that's funny.
So.
All right. Well, I think it's probably about time to wrap up. We've been going for a while, but before we close out, I want to share a couple of our community's stories, work that they've been doing here in the Resonant Art community. I didn't send you guys these links. I should have done that, but I'm just going to put them on the screen for the viewers to see. The first one comes from Mo Senko. Says, "Hey, I know you have a deep appreciation for music that I can relate to. He's done a little video here on Nobuo Uematsu, the top 10 Uematsu compositions. So let me go ahead and put this on the screen so that you guys can see his channel. Mo Senko, top 10 Nobuo Uematsu compositions. There have been a lot of people who have asked me to do a similar type of video. Can you do a top 10 Final Fantasy music or something like that? So Mo Senko beat me to the punch. Go check out his video instead to get your some good thoughts on Final Fantasy music in particular.
Nice.
His
I'll
favorite.
add it. I'll check it out after this.
Let me go ahead and put this into the chat so that you guys who are watching on Twitch can check it out right now. And of course, it'll be in the video description as well when it goes up on YouTube. So that's from Mosenko. Thank you for sending that in. And lastly, from Lipstick Generation, we showed one off a couple weeks ago. He's been doing a song in, I guess, to commemorate each episode of Game of Thrones throughout the season. So he's got one for every episode. They released the last one, the reaction song, I guess, to episode 6, the finale. He says here he is, didn't get a chance to post this because I've been composing a film score for an indie flick. Awesome. That's great. I can't wait to hear it.
Cool.
He says, but we did miss this song for the Game of Thrones finale. The entire plot of the show summed up in the song form. So if you guys liked that, check out Lipstick Generation's channel. You can see all of his reaction songs to the episodes from this last season. That's going to be in the description as well as in the chat now. So thank you for your submissions, everybody. Good work. And thank you, Kim and Tim, for coming on. It's a pleasure talking to you guys. Appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
It was.
Good job moderating.
The links to their Instagram or Twitter or whatever they want me to send you guys to check out their work and follow them will be in the descriptions of the video when it goes up. So look for that there. And until next week, thanks everybody for watching. Have a great remainder of your weekend.
Adios.
Peace.
Yeah.